Welcome back to Fiscally Fit. In today's segment, we're talking about share, save, and invest. We have Amy and Vanessa here, and they've been giving us some really solid advice and information on how you can take advantage of saving and investing. And later on in the segment, we'll talk about what you can do or what we've done to share. So we're going to jump back in. Something that maybe people of my age group haven't been considering as much is retirement. We kind of thought, oh, that's for the baby boomers, but we're seeing how important that is now that we start with our retirement. Amy, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about what steps maybe we can take or what your company offers in terms of retirement?
Yes, definitely retirement is something that you need to start as soon as possible, especially for our generation, because we want to work for a least amount of time as possible, and we want to be retired for as long as time as possible. So making sure that we have the dollars set aside so that we don't have to worry about going back to work at some point in time later on. So making sure that, again, and it starts with just a small amount, because the thing is that time is the most valuable asset that you really have, more so than the dollars, because the older you get, the more money you have to put away. Whereas a 30-year-old maybe have to put away, you know, maybe a couple $100s a month. If you go out 10 years or 20 or 15 years, you might be looking at maybe 3 times that amount or 4 times that amount. So that's why it's really key to start as early as possible, because the earlier you start, the less you have to put in on a monthly or annual basis, so you don't feel the pinch as much. But when you get older and the closer you get to retirement, it really starts to take an effect, and you have less time to be able to make those dollars work for you.
Now, what are some of the products that they have when it comes to retirement? I know 401k, that's a buzzword for people who are working for an employer, but there are different types of investment instruments, and there's IRAs, of course. What are some of those different classes, and what does that mean? Because, you know, different people see different things on their paycheck, and they're like, I'm sending this money off, and sometimes you have matching and all that kind of stuff. Can you go a little bit more in depth into that?
Sure. Basically, you have a couple different options as it relates to retirement. The first one that you have, most commonly a lot of people are aware of, is what is called a 401k, which is essentially an employer-sponsored retirement plan, whereby you can put away dollars, and depending on the company, they might match you, they might not, depending on what the benefit is. They're going to match you up to a certain percent. And basically you're putting away dollars on a tax-deferred basis, which means that you're not paying any taxes on those dollars now, and that the money you're investing in the options that you do have in the account, and over time those dollars are going to grow, and that when you do get ready to utilize those dollars, then you have them at your access.
Now, you said tax deferred. That doesn't mean you avoid taxes altogether.
No, it does not.
What's the assumption and why you would get a 401k or a 403?
For hospitals, schools, and nonprofit organizations, if you work at any of those type of entities. You also have what's called a 457, which is for government entities as well.
Okay. Now, what's the advantage, the tax deferred? What does that mean?
Basically, it means that you're deferring the taxes now. Essentially, if you're putting away, let's say $5,000 into your 401k or your 403b this year, essentially that's less income that you'll have to claim when you go to file your taxes the following year.
Okay.
So essentially you're deferring the tax that you would have paid now because you put the money in, those dollars, into the 401k.
And now the other advantage, of course, on top of that is what you get in interest or money you make off
Correct.
of
The
it.
growth that you then get on those dollars that you put away into that plan are now tax deferred as well, whereas you might, if you put it into a checking or a savings account or toward a regular brokerage account, you get taxed on those dollars every year. You have the option to have that growth compound without having any taxable liability until you go to pull those dollars out later on.
Okay, and then when you're older, the tax is lower, or?
Well, it all depends on the person's financial status. Typically, as we get older, we typically tend to earn more dollars, and we have less tax deductions. Typically, the kids are out of school. Typically, the mortgage is close to being paid off, if not paid off. So that's really a big myth that people think, is that when they that when they are older, that they are in a lower tax bracket, which might not necessarily be the case. It could be, but it might not necessarily be. So that's definitely something you want to take into consideration when you are doing your retirement planning, is looking at how taxes will affect you later on.
Okay, well, Vanessa, what advice do you give to some of your retirees or people who are now on like a fixed income now, who are trying to take advantage of some of the investments that they already have?
Right. Well, definitely putting it somewhere, number one, that's liquid, so the money's accessible to them. Kind of break it down to where, okay, how much money do you need for yourself for the next few years, and how much money do you need, would you like to save for your family? Unfortunately, it's a sad topic, but it's definitely, most people when they reach a certain age, they're only going to live so many years, and they're going to want to save for their children and their grandchildren. So if that's the case, we're definitely going to put it somewhere where we can reach the highest yield, at the same time saving it or keeping it in a place where you're not going to put that money at risk. So typically at that point, you're not only just planning for the next few years, you're also planning, for their families and what their families are going to take over at that point.
Right. Now with retirement, we're talking about people who aren't working.
Right.
But there's another class that's gotten pretty large of people who aren't working, and that hit home for me, having to make a big change in my life in losing my job, my corporate job, but then having to make a change in my career. What advice would you give, Vanessa, for people who have investments and have saving accounts and they've just lost their job and they have to make some real serious changes in how they're doing things? What advice would you give them?
The first advice, and I know it's very difficult, is to try to keep it. Do everything possible to not have to go into that money. You could continue, make pretend that money never existed. That money is somewhere hidden and you can't reach it for, until you retire. That would be my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is definitely to roll it over. And that means you don't have to keep it with whatever financial institution your employer had it with. You could actually transfer it over to a branch or talk to a financial advisor, and we could definitely set you up to where that same funds could still be working for you, even when you're no longer with that employer. So there's various options still for people that are unemployed. But definitely my first advice is make pretend that you never saw that money never existed, because if you go into it, not only are you losing the benefit of the tax breaks that you're going to get by even having it. Number two, you're also going to have to pay taxes on the money that you take out. And number three, the worst part is the penalties. You're going to end up paying. You're going to lose a big chunk of that money that you've worked very hard to keep, and it's just not worth it at this point. I understand, obviously everybody's situation is different, but if you can pretend that money never existed and just kind of forget about it, it'll benefit you at the end, definitely.